Well, hello again. This is part 2 of how to choose an RV with more thoughts and suggestions for your RV purchase. Stay tuned. Start off by just making some corrections from the previous section of this series, this video, how to choose an RV. And that is, I mistakenly said that this was a Class C, but it's a Class B, obviously, by looking at it. And I also mentioned that with the acreage that we used to have being backed up to Crown land, that you could go on a dirt bike and go riding for 3 hours or more. Well, that's what I would do. And that was just kind of a loop that I would do and run around various different places back there. But literally, you could go for days, months, years if you were capable. It's just that's how huge the land is that's out there. Most of it's accessible only by quad or dirt bike, ATV type thing. But yeah, I just wanted to make that point. And we lived there for 7 years, so just wanted to tidy that up. In the very first video, when I introduced T-Rex, I mistakenly said the owners improperly there, and the owners are Darwin and Ryan, and just really appreciate them for selling T-Rex to us, and they're avid 4x4 RVers as well. So the other thing too is I mentioned about how it was not my preference at all to be able to be in an RV park, and I don't want anyone to take offense to that. I mean, we will periodically from time to time go into RV parks, but really the whole goal is to be not in those. Now, if that's what you do, if that's what you like, well then, awesome, all the power to you, and then you can have yourself a larger rig and not be confined to a small space like this. So that's great. I mean, my parents did that. They had their fifth wheel. They had bought their 28, 30-foot fifth wheel, and I think they went up to about a 32, 34 foot. So they had 2 fifth wheels ultimately that they were going down to Yuma, Arizona with, and they would park it at an RV park with all the other snowbirds, and they had a blast. I mean, it was a great time. They had the camaraderie and friends and all these amenities that were all there. So worked out well for them. They they did that for many years, and so if that's your thing, then great. So I guess the question has to be asked, like we have the black hole, the Toyota Tundra there. Why didn't we just go ahead and buy ourselves a bumper pull, since so many people were doing that out in the backcountry that I saw? And really that was a very good consideration, because I mean, you could buy a nice bumper pull for $10,000 to $20,000 used. I mean, I'd buy it used. I mean, that's one of the things I would recommend, especially if you're just jumping into it. And we'll get into that a little bit later on, but if you can step into it at the lower expense and buy a used unit that's well taken care of, then it could save you a lot of trouble. But we'll get into that down the road here. So I was looking at the whole idea of having a trailer. You just hook up and go with it, and you don't have to maintain it, and lower costs. But some of the things that stopped the thought process there was we want to be able to go onto roads that kind of venture off into the bush or by a lake or whatnot, and you don't know the road because you haven't been on it, because you're discovering the situation. And what happens if you go down the road for a mile and you can't turn around, and you're stuck there with this rig, and you're doing a lot of backing up? I mean, it's going to happen. Not that much you're going to be stuck, but it certainly will. I mean, so it's something that you'd have to consider, right? So that was something that was definitely I was considering. And the other thing is, when you go into a city, it's not something that you can just go and park anywhere, right? I mean, hard enough to stealth park with a van, let alone a rig, with a trailer. So then it puts you in a situation where you're going to be having to go back to the RV parks. Another thing too is Bob Wells from Cheap RV Living, communicated with him a little bit, and he talked about how he likes to do the same sort of thing, where he finds these little roads that you can go up and find nice secluded spots on BLM land where he goes. But the problem is that you end up having trees overgrowing the roads quite a bit. They're not maintained, and so you need to have a lower rig and a smaller rig that can get through there, because you're going to have all the branches up against your rig. And he's had friends who wanted to go and follow them or follow him with a Class C type rig or something bigger, and you know, you're faced with that sort of scenario. So by having a really tall trailer behind you, big fifth wheel, can be, you know, something that will stop you from going down these side roads. The other thing, the reason why we ended up with this Class B is that, I mean, it's just so much fun. I mean, it's like a little fort. It's sure, there's going to be some inconveniences of being smaller and everything else like that, but to be able to have your seats right there, and you spin around, and you got your home on wheels. I mean, how fun is that, right? I mean, I could see the appeal of having a Class A motorhome for that very reason. It's just like you're not, it's not a separate entity from your drive vehicle. It's just kind of all in one, and I think it's like a fort. I like it quite a bit. And one of the things that was a really complicating factor in trying to decide a vehicle was Twisted Sister. Now, Twisted Sister is it's a gas EC300 two-stroke hyperactive monster psychopath bike. Does that kind of describe it? It's a you know, pure enduro race bike, which happens to be street legal, and that's my baby. And I want to be able to have it concealed. I don't want to have it hanging off the back. Be nice to be in a trailer. But then, you know, one of the few options I had was having a vehicle that has a toy hauler built into it, or maybe a Sprinter vehicle, a Sprinter van, where you can kind of, you know, park it in the back and have like a garage bay. Another kind of, you know, off the wall idea was having a handy bus for handicapped people, because you know, have the seats in the front you could pull out, and then in the back, off to the side, there's a door with a ramp, you know, like for wheelchairs. It lifts, you know, or actually it would lift up the wheelchair, and then you can bring your bike in there and have the whole back as being a container system for your garage. And I was really kind of up on that. I like that quite a bit. And if you got the Ford chassis again, then you can go and lift it. And the other thing too, that brings up a thought here, is that the reason why I was talking about wanting to lift up the vehicle is my preference was to buy something that was already built out, like a Class B from Pleasureway or Leisure Travel or whatnot. But most of those end up having the tanks and everything hanging on the, you know, like just 6 inches off the ground. So you're really restricted for ground clearance. So there you'd pick it up 6 inches, and you'd have a lot more leeway as far as where you go. But if you're just going to be not doing that, you know, the Ford Econoline van, I mean, they sit, you know, a good 10, 12 inches off the ground just as it is. I mean, they got great clearance. You wouldn't have to lift it. All you'd have to do, if you really wanted to go far into the bush, is maybe put a air locker on the back differential, or a Detroit locker. And for those who don't know what that means, is vehicles have an open differential. That means when you go around a corner, you know, one wheel wants to turn faster than the other because it has a bigger arc that it's traveling on. So an open differential will allow that to happen. But the problem is when you get stuck and you're in slippery situations and you start spinning, one wheel will spin or be the drive wheel, the other wheel will just sit there and not be turning. So by getting something that can actually lock up your rear end where both wheels are turning, it gives you, you know, a great advantage of being able to get unstuck or get stuck even further. So, but yeah, if you're just going to be stealth camping with a van, you know, that Ford has a really good clearance, and even the GMC too as well, right? And or the older Dodges, they sit up pretty high too as well. Now my dad, he started off with a Ford Econoline van. It was the same series as this, it was 1978. I wish I had a picture of it. It was a beautifully done vehicle. And the reason I'm telling you this is I want to get into some stories here of people who did RVs and how they managed, you know, their progress and what happened to them, So these stories, might be of help to you. Well, he had this Ford Econoline van. He lifted the roof, put a high top like this, built it out, not similar to this, but anyhow, it was still very nice, right? It had a table and chairs and the fridge and whatnot. And he used it as a daily driver. I mean, he was working in the city of Edmonton, and he drove it every day for his daily driver. So that's a real plus for that vehicle, being small as it was. And then I remember him talking about how they wanted to snowbird to Yuma, and I was just a teenager at that point in time, and he was talking about the different options, and I'm thinking about it. And I says, well, it's obvious. I mean, all you have to do is get yourself like a fifth wheel, because then you can unhook your truck, and then you got a drive vehicle, and you're not towing everything around all the time. I must have been fairly convincing how I did it, because that's what he bought. And he ended up selling the adventure van he had, and I'm so sorry he did that, because I think really what they should have done is just taken the Class B down there and tried that. I mean, his brother ended up having a Class C that was not very long. It was 24 feet or less, and he would go down there with that with his wife. But they did that, and they went and bought a Ford truck, brand new. I think back then it was like 30 grand. It wasn't four-wheel drive, but 3/4 ton, and they went and bought another $30,000-$40,000 fifth wheel. And they used it for quite a few years, and it worked out well. But I told you the story about how my mom jackknifed it. So you have that complicating factor of, you're towing something behind you, and if the roads get slippery and you're going, they were just going down to Yuma for their annual trip, and then they ended up jackknifing it into the ditch on snowy conditions. And it was a mess. Everything got repaired, but I mean, it certainly put a damper on everything. And then after several years or multiple years of doing this, my dad developed early Alzheimer's, and it really showed up when he came back from his trip to Yuma. And he couldn't, it was kind of a hard scenario for him to be able to put his rig into his yard, because they were in the city of Edmonton, and he couldn't do it. They drove all the way down to Yuma and back, but he couldn't put the rig back into the yard. He had to call AMA and have them do it, and that was the end. I mean, it was over for them at that point in time. I think if they would have maybe stayed with the Class B, their Ford Econoline van, Mom could have done all the driving, and they could have still maybe gone down there, because it was early Alzheimer's, and it took a while for it to develop. But okay, I have a good friend, and he's the one who actually talked me out of getting a Class B when I was a teenager. I'm also getting into that story right now real quick. My dad had that Ford Econoline van, built it all out and everything else like that, and I thought it was pretty cool. And just high schoolish, just out of high school I think it was, still living with my parents, and I floated the idea past my friend. I says, well, why don't we go ahead and buy ourselves a rig like that, and we can go and travel around. And I'm not gay, by the way, but just he's a good friend, right? So, and he just laughed me out of the room so hard and so convincingly that I just I thought, I must be mental even to think about it. I mean, why would anyone think like that anyhow? And, well, I guess what stopped me really was I was living at my parents' house. I had it really cushy there, and I spent, $20,000 on my home audio system. And this is back, way back when. This is 30 years ago. And, you need a room for that. And so it's kind of already boxing myself in as far as being able to make that choice. But it's interesting how, something can take so long to come around again. And then later on, when I moved out of the home, I never thought about even considering a camper van. I mean, this is before the internet and everything else. And had I been having access to that, maybe I might have, like you guys right now, you were able to watch and hear stories that, there's no way that I could have been able to have that access back then. And I wish my dad would have actually talked to me and said, hey, this is a viable option. I mean, we do deal with -40 weather up here, so that's one of the big stoppers, right? But, I mean, you can go over to Vancouver and spend the winter over there. But yeah, so I never even considered the idea of having going into an RV, and I was looking around trying to find a cheap place to rent, and it was just all daunting and expensive. And I did manage to come up with a good situation there for a while, but anyhow, so yeah, it's funny how things go. But anyhow, this person my friend who laughed me out of the room considering the idea of living in a Class B. Now his brother, maybe 8 years ago, had the bug, and he bought himself a Dodge Diesel 3/4 ton, $60,000 and then he went and he bought, one of the biggest fifth wheels that you can buy. He went all the way over to BC to get it. $90,000 later for the fifth wheel, so you can see it's a good one. And he went over to where he was going to park, or like a RV park there, and it's down, a fairly steep road with lots of switchbacks. And the fifth wheel didn't have the brakes hooked up properly for some reason. I don't know why. And he was afraid of going off the off the road and dying, And then when he finally gets to the bottom and he's trying to park the thing, he's never ever driven a trailer before, and he was blocking the traffic, and it was just a total nightmare. And he actually accidentally kind of jackknifed it and damaged the back of his truck. And later on, when he drove home, there's lots of crosswinds in the mountains, and they're kind of sketchy roads sometimes. And when he got back and tried to park it again, he damaged his truck again, jackknifing it somehow. I don't know why he was hitting his truck. It doesn't make sense, but that's what the story was told me. Well, anyhow, he sold that fifth wheel within, a month, and took a huge loss. So there's something for you. I mean, you got to try before you buy. And then there's a situation where it's, you got $150,000 investment into the RV world, and it's all brand new. So yeah, there's a thing where you want to go and get something used, right? Okay, my neighbor, actually, when we lived out in the backcountry, he lived in the backcountry in a fifth wheel for 10 years during the summers. He's a directional driller, and he would go and do that in the wintertime and work on the rigs. But in the summertime, he would go and take his fifth wheel out, and he would just live out there. And he got to be so good in the backcountry that people were hiring him as a guide, and we'd go quadding together. And hopefully I can pull up some pictures of that. But he knew the backcountry, so I mean, I had no idea. I was lost. And we're always going full tilt. Those Can-Ams, I mean, they'd go 60 miles an hour, and we were flying on those things. And I was just trying to keep up. I wasn't so crazy about going so fast, but these guys, I mean, they would get there in a hurry. I'll tell you that much. But one of his friends purchased an expensive Class A, and he ended up having mice problems wherever they parked it. I don't know if it was on his acreage or maybe it was an RV park. Probably, yeah, I think he had an acreage. But mice would get in there, and just a total nightmare. It'd wreck that RV. So when you go and purchase a bigger rig or a trailer, you're gonna have to, a lot of people go and put them in these RV parks, not just a lot, so that you can just store it. And you might have problems with mice, right? So you got to be careful with that. If you're in town here, I haven't seen a mouse in town here ever, and so you can just T-Rex is just sitting here in the driveway, and I'm not worried about mice at all right now. Well, okay, I guess that's about it for right now. I think that'll be the end of this little mini-series of how to buy an RV, at least sharing my experience of, how it worked out for us. And, I just hope the best that you can find the rig that you're looking for. And there's lots of used ones out there, so there's lots of opportunity. And you'll have a great time with it. All right, bye for now.